You're embarrassing yourself, Natalie, my husband whispered sharply, forcing a smile for the guests. You're imagining things again. Then a stranger stepped beside me and said quietly, Ma'am, you need to see this file. My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 38 years old. I work as a public school librarian in a small town where everyone knows everyone. And I spend most of my days surrounded by the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of old paper. I married my husband Daniel young, right after college, back when his smile still felt honest and his promises still felt real. From the outside, we looked like the perfect couple. He built a small regional construction company with his brother, and I played the part of the supportive wife who stayed in the background while his career climbed. His family constantly praised him. Daniel was the one they celebrated at every dinner, every holiday, every milestone. He was their pride, their success story. And me, I was just the quiet partner who poured the coffee and nodded along. I'm not glamorous. I'm not wealthy. I drive a 12-year-old sedan with a dent in the bumper. And my idea of a perfect evening is a cup of tea and a novel. But there's one thing about me most people overlook. I have a sharp eye for details and patterns. Daniel used to tease me about it. He'd call it my librarian brain. But recently that brain started catching things I couldn't ignore. Strange bank alerts showing up on our shared account. Secretive phone calls Daniel would take outside in the garage with the door shut. Documents vanishing from our home office overnight. When I asked questions, he waved me off. Told me I was anxious. Told me I was overthinking. I wasn't rich or glamorous, but I had something they didn't expect. Patience, and a memory for things people hoped I'd forget. If you've ever been made to feel crazy for asking honest questions, this story is for you. Subscribe if you've ever been dismissed or underestimated by someone you trusted. Share your experience in the comments because your voice matters here. And click hype if you believe the truth always finds its way out. It was a Saturday evening in late September when Daniel threw our 30th anniversary party. Not our wedding anniversary. The company's anniversary. He just happened to schedule it the same weekend as ours, and somehow the company won. The event hall was rented out with white tablecloths and string lights. Business partners mingled with family. Employees laughed near the open bar. Reporters from the local paper snapped photos. Daniel stood at the front of the room in a tailored navy suit and gave a speech about loyalty, hard work, and the power of family. He talked for nearly 10 minutes. He mentioned his brother. He mentioned his parents. He mentioned the first client who ever trusted them with a contract. He mentioned me for exactly one sentence. And of course, thanks to my lovely wife for keeping the home fires burning. That was it. 30 years of standing beside him, reduced to a line you'd find on a greeting card. I clapped along with everyone else. But as the room shifted into cocktail chatter, I caught something. 2 employees standing near the kitchen entrance, speaking low, their faces tight with worry. One of them said the word investigators. The other shook his head and muttered something about records not matching. My stomach dropped. I crossed the room and found Daniel near the bar, his hand wrapped around a glass of bourbon. I kept my voice low. Why are people talking about investigators? He didn't even look at me. Because you're hearing things again. Stop. I pressed harder. I told him I wasn't imagining it, that I heard specific words from specific people. He set his glass down and turned toward a group of guests nearby. Then he laughed. Loudly. My wife thinks there's some grand conspiracy, he said, gesturing at me with his drink. She's always been a little paranoid. The group chuckled awkwardly. A few people glanced at me with pity. His sister, standing just a few feet away, leaned in with a smirk. Natalie reads too many mystery novels. The laughter grew. My face burned. I could feel the blood rushing to my ears, the sting of tears I refused to let fall. I turned and walked toward the hallway, desperate to get away from the noise and the humiliation. That's when I nearly ran into him. A man I had never seen before, thin, nervous, wearing a gray coat that looked too warm for the season. He stepped to the side and spoke quietly. Are you Natalie Brooks? I nodded slowly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed folder. It was thick. The front was stamped with an official court seal. He pressed it into my hands. You deserve to know before this explodes. I opened the first page right there in that dim hallway with the muffled sound of the party behind me. My husband's name was printed in bold letters, linked to fraud allegations, hidden bank accounts, and misappropriated funds. But it was the second page that made me stop breathing. Several financial transactions, loans, and shell company registrations were listed under my name. My social security number. My signature. Forged. Someone had used my identity, and I had a terrible feeling I knew exactly who. I waited until the last guest left. The caterers were packing up. Daniel was loosening his tie by the car when I walked up to him and held the folder against his chest. Explain this. He barely glanced at it. He flipped through 2 pages, tossed the folder onto the hood of the car, and shook his head. This is fake. Someone's messing with you. It has a court stamp, Daniel. Then someone went through a lot of trouble to trick my gullible wife. He grabbed his keys and turned away. I followed him. Then explain why my name is on these accounts. Explain why my signature is on documents I've never seen. He spun around. His face was hard. You're letting strangers manipulate you. You want to destroy everything I've built because you're bored and suspicious? Go ahead. But don't expect me to stand here and entertain this. He got in the car and slammed the door. I stood in the parking lot alone, clutching the folder, listening to his engine fade into the dark. The next morning I called his mother, then his sister, then his brother's wife. I thought maybe one of them would listen. I was wrong. His mother told me I was making something out of nothing. His sister said I was jealous of Daniel's success and looking for attention. And when I called his brother's wife, she hung up on me before I could finish my first sentence. Then his brother Ray called me directly. His voice was cold. You're trying to ruin everything we built. You want to blow up this family? Over what? Some papers a stranger gave you at a party. I realized the family was closing ranks. Every door I knocked on locked tighter. A week later, I got a letter from a bank I had never done business with. It was a notice about 2 massive unpaid loans totaling over $400,000, both under my name, both tied to shell companies connected to Daniel's business. My hands were shaking when I called him. I could barely get the words out. Daniel, there are loans. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. In my name. His voice was flat. Almost bored. Maybe you shouldn't have signed things without reading them. I never signed anything. That's going to be hard to prove, isn't it? The line went dead. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that call. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove ticked. And slowly, clearly, the full picture came together. I wasn't just being dismissed. I was being set up. If an investigation ever reached their door, I was the one whose name was on the paper trail. I was the fall person, the expendable wife who signed things without reading them. But they made one mistake. They assumed I wasn't paying attention. That night, I pulled a box from the top shelf of my bedroom closet, sat on the floor, and began organizing every piece of evidence I had collected over the past 3 years. Here's the thing about being a librarian. You learn to catalog. You learn to archive. You learn that information is only as powerful as your ability to find it when you need it. And for years, every time something felt off, I quietly saved proof. Whenever a bank alert didn't match our budget, I took a screenshot and uploaded it to a private cloud folder only I could access. Whenever Daniel left documents on the printer and snatched them away when I walked in, I had already scanned them on my phone from across the room. I had emails where Daniel discussed wire transfers to accounts I had never heard of. I had recordings of phone calls where he talked about restructuring liability in ways that made my stomach turn. What they didn't know was that every time Daniel said I was imagining things, I saved proof that I wasn't. I also kept old tax filings he thought he'd shredded, company letters addressed to our home that he tried to intercept, and voicemails where he casually discussed deals that sounded nothing like legitimate construction contracts. When I compared my archive to the stranger's court-stamped file, the pieces fit together like a puzzle I had been assembling without even realizing it. Account numbers matched. Dates aligned. Names repeated. A larger investigation was clearly already underway, and my evidence filled in the gaps. But I also understood something important. If I moved too fast or too loud, Daniel would find a way to flip the narrative. He'd paint me as the unstable wife, the paranoid woman who fabricated documents to win a divorce. I needed someone who understood not just the law, but the family. Someone who knew where the bodies were buried. There was one person. His name was Howard Klein. He was an old retired lawyer, 81 years old with reading glasses permanently perched on his nose, and a voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. He had helped Daniel's father establish the construction company decades ago, back when it was just a two-truck operation running out of a garage. Howard had walked away from the family years earlier under circumstances nobody talked about. I found his number through an old company directory I had saved from a filing cabinet Daniel forgot I cleaned. When I called, he answered on the second ring. I told him who I was. There was a long pause. Then he said, "I was wondering when someone from that family would finally call." We met at a diner outside of town. The coffee was bitter and the vinyl booths were cracked, but Howard listened without interrupting as I laid everything on the table. Printed emails, scanned documents, recordings on a USB drive, bank notices, the court-stamped file. When I finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Natalie, this is enough to start a federal case." He told me he had suspected the brothers were hiding financial misconduct for years, but he never had the proof. He explained that Daniel and Ray had likely planned from the beginning to shift liability to me if authorities ever came knocking. My name, my credit, my identity, all expendable. Together, Howard and I began quietly organizing the evidence into a formal legal package. Meanwhile, Daniel's arrogance only grew. He hosted dinners. He boasted to friends about expanding the company. He told anyone who would listen that Natalie was going through something, and that he was being very patient with me. Family members stopped inviting me to gatherings. His mother sent me a card suggesting I see someone professional. So I did exactly what they wanted. I went quiet. I stopped asking questions. I stopped showing up to events. I let Daniel believe I was defeated, broken, embarrassed into silence. Inside, I was counting down the days. 6 weeks after the anniversary party, Daniel hosted a company gala. It was bigger than anything he had ever organized. A ballroom downtown, rented for the night, filled with investors, employees, local business owners, and 3 reporters from regional outlets covering the event. The chandeliers were enormous. The smell of expensive cologne and catered steak filled the air. Daniel stood at the podium in a charcoal suit, his hair freshly cut, his smile wide and practiced. He spoke about integrity. He spoke about building something that lasts. He spoke about family values and the importance of trust. I stood near the back of the room, wearing a simple black dress, holding a glass of water. No one spoke to me. Most people there probably assumed I was a caterer. As the applause began to die down, a figure moved through the crowd toward the front of the room. Howard Klein, in a press suit he probably hadn't worn in a decade, approached the event host and asked calmly for the microphone. The host hesitated. Howard said, "I have legal information regarding this company that the guests and the press need to hear." The room went still. Daniel's face changed. The confident smile cracked. Howard took the microphone and, in his steady gravel voice, explained that federal authorities were currently reviewing financial fraud involving hidden accounts, forged signatures, and systematic identity misuse tied to the company's leadership. He held up the court-stamped documents. Then he said the words that shattered everything Daniel had built. "The evidence shows Mrs. Natalie Brooks was not responsible for any of the fraudulent activity. She was the intended scapegoat." Murmurs rippled through the ballroom. Heads turned. I walked forward slowly. The room parted. I stopped a few feet from the podium, looked directly at Daniel, and spoke clearly. "You told everyone I was paranoid. I was just paying attention." I held up the USB drive containing the archive. Emails, recordings, transaction logs, years of quiet documentation from a woman everyone underestimated. Howard played one recording through the ballroom speakers. Daniel's own voice filled the room, casual and dismissive, saying Natalie would never notice the paperwork. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stepped forward, his mouth opening to argue, but Howard raised his hand. "The evidence has already been submitted to investigators." Anything you say now will be on the record. Reporters surged forward with questions. Camera flashes popped. Daniel stood frozen at his own podium, his empire crumbling under the same chandelier lights that were supposed to make him shine. The investigation moved quickly after that night. Federal authorities opened formal cases against Daniel and Ray. Bank records confirmed the forged signatures. Shell companies were traced back to their personal accounts. My name was officially cleared within 3 months. I moved out of the house and into a small apartment near the library where I work. The place is quiet. The walls are thin and the kitchen is barely big enough for one person. But it's mine. The marriage ended, and I won't pretend that didn't hurt. 30 years is a long time to spend building something with someone only to discover the foundation was rotten. But for the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel strong. The humiliation that once silenced me at that anniversary party became the very moment that gave me my voice back. I don't regret being quiet all those years. I regret believing that my silence meant I had nothing to say. For years they called me paranoid. But sometimes the quiet person in the room is the only one paying attention. If someone close to you ever made you feel crazy for questioning their behavior, you know exactly how deep that wound goes. Gaslighting doesn't leave bruises. It leaves you doubting your own mind, your own memory, your own worth. If you've been through something like that, share your story in the comments. Not for sympathy, but so someone else scrolling through at 2 in the morning knows they're not alone. Subscribe to this community that believes truth matters. And click hype to help this story reach others who need to hear it. Your story has power. If you felt a connection to mine, please subscribe and share your journey in the comments. Every hype you give this video helps empower someone else who may still be silent. Thank you for being here and for listening.